Serious, what's your best story about listening to a gut feeling? Really didn't feel like going out for a drink after work with friends. But something told me to go. Met my husband that night in the bar. We've been married 24 years. I woke up one morning with a deep sense of be very careful today. Around mid-afternoon, I was stopped at a red light. One where you had zero sight of the direction left of the intersection. The light turned green. I felt the be very careful gloom again. I started to pull into the intersection very slowly, looking carefully in the direction I couldn't see from. It was now a good 5 seconds after the light changed. Horn behind me was blowing. When zoom, a semi came flying past the nose of my truck. How it didn't hit me I have no idea. Had to have missed me by literally a hair. After that, I didn't feel that gloom the rest of the day-night. Long story short, Dad nearly kidnapped by fake customs officers. When he was a young adult, my dad went to Madrid to stay with a friend. There was sudden change and they couldn't pick him up from the train station. He had to sleep rough in the station. After being mistaken for a prostitute twice, 2 customs officers showed up and started showing my dad their badges and telling him to go with them. Already unsure because they weren't in uniform, my dad followed them anyway. They were putting his stuff in the back of an unmarked car and beckoning him to get in. All the time reassuring him and showing their badges. When he saw a police officer walking down the side of the road, feeling that something was really wrong, he went up to the police officer and asked him to help get his stuff out of the car. The police officer went over to the 2 men, got the stuff out the car and talked to them and got them to show him their papers. Turns out they were fakes and the officer took Dad back to the police station after arresting the 2 men and allowed him to stay the night there. Dad got back with his friend and we all lived happily ever after. In high school around everybody's birthday, all their friends would go all out, bringing balloons, brownies, gifts, you name it. It was just a fun tradition the whole school partook in to help with stress and whatnot. Fast forward to my birthday and as per usual I was given balloons, cake, funny letters from my good friends. All of a sudden I felt like someone was watching me and I turn around to see a girl in our class staring at me. I walk over and just start a conversation with her, asking her when her own birthday was, and made a mental note. I had such a string-out feeling that I needed to do something for her on her birthday even though this was our first time talking. I knew this girl was very shy, a little strange, and had recently been given a lot of crap for coming out to a few people at our school. So I figured her birthday might not be as recognized or participated in as maybe mine was. Fast forward to her own birthday, and I brought her the biggest balloon I could find and some baked goods. As classes went on, I soon realized that was the only thing anyone got her that day. I caught her in the parking lot to say happy birthday one last time before heading to practice and she seemed happy and normal. Fast forward to about 4 months later I got chatting to her again. She pulled me aside and told me that for the last year or so she had been planning to kill herself on her birthday. I was in shock. She told me that the balloon and goodies showed her enough of a brighter side to life to hold off and rethink things. Since a stranger seemed to care enough about a special day for her, I still can't believe it. TLDR, a balloon saved a girl's life. I was driving home late on night and just minding my own business, hanging out in the center of 3 lanes on the highway doing maybe a few mph over the speed limit. Suddenly I just felt, almost heard, the strongest gut feeling I'd ever had that I needed to swerve over now, so I did. And not a second later did a huge black truck come absolutely flying through all 3 lanes. Just missing me by feet. Would have nailed me if I'd have stayed where I was. Ducker didn't have his lights on so I had no idea he was there. Strange addition to the story, I don't believe in God or prayer or anything like that at all. My mother, though, called me almost immediately after this happened. She said she woke up with an urgent feeling to pray for me right then. She asked if anything had happened. I told her about what had happened and she started crying. Absolutely nuts. I'm a recovered drug addict and party girl. For 2 years of my life, almost every day was focused on going to parties and getting drunk and high. I would go to random parties and take random drugs just to achieve this. One Saturday, a good friend calls to invite me to a party at his brand new house. It was going to be a good party, with a bunch of my friends, and lots of substances to partake in. For some reason though, my brain told me to sit this party out. It was probably the first Saturday in over a year that I had chosen to stay in. Woke up the next morning and found out that some of my friends, including the one who had invited me, had gotten into a huge fight. One of the guys pulled a gun out, chased the others through the house, and shot 2 guys, one in the stomach and one in the face. Literally dodged a bullet there. I told this story in the last gut feeling thread, but it's worth reposting. I was a birthday party princess in college. Dress up as a Disney character. Sing some songs. Help with cake. Paint faces. Typical party stuff. I get called to a party that began at 8 p.m. Unusual but not unheard of in our industry. A lot of Spanish speaking families party well into the night. But I pull up down the street. Princesses don't drive, and begin walking to the house. Dressed as Sleeping Beauty. My party box of supplies in hand. But when I saw the house I knew immediately something was wrong. There were no lights on. No cars. No balloons. But against my better judgment I knocked on the door. This super creepy looking guy in his mid-50s answers. In a dirty shirt and jeans. And the first thing he says is the part is around back. I took one look at this guy and booked it as fast as I could while holding a box. Wearing a ball gown and being mildly crippled to begin with. I got into my car. Locked the doors. Floored it to 7-11 and called my boss. The party never called demanding to know where their princess was. No one asked for their deposit back. My boss called police non-emergency, but I don't know if anything was ever done. I'm 100% sure there was no party in that house. So my friend and I were walking around at like 2 o'clock in the morning playing Pokemon Go when it had first came out. It was very quiet and we were just talking to each other when all of a sudden a very loud truck came down the road and drove past us. Then all of a sudden I just got this feeling in my gut that told me to run. I told my friend what I was feeling, and he immediately told me to run. So we ran behind a gas station parking lot and hid behind a dumpster for a second. And sure enough that same truck had turned around at the light and came back to the parking lot and even went behind the store, in their truck, looking for us. They were in and out, but it was still one of the most chilling feelings I've had before. I've told this story before, but it was when my gut told me to not stop and help a woman in distress, and to keep driving. She turned out to be a ploy for a group of people who attack people and steal cars from those who pull over to help. It's a creepy feeling. May I do a not listening to my gut feeling? 2 months before my marriage I had the most gut-wrenching feeling that I should not marry the woman I was about to. 8 months later we divorced. I was so stupid. My girlfriend, now wife, called me the night before 9/11 telling me she had the strangest feeling that something terrible was about to happen. She had never said anything like previously, nor since. The odd thing was that when she called at that moment, I was holding the engagement ring I had purchased for her earlier that day. So you can imagine what was going through my head as she told me about her gut feeling. Was taking my dog to park and was stuck at a light. I live in a busy city and people drive like shit. The light turned green and people began walking across the crosswalk. As I pulled out to take my turn, I felt like I needed to brake and just went with it. Right as I do that, a white SUV flies through their red light. They almost hit the people walking across and come within inches of my car. I laid on my horn and all I could see was this middle-aged woman looking up from her phone. This all happened within about a second, but I still hate that woman and her face is burned into my brain. She could have killed the people walking or hit my car and tossed my dog. Don't strap her in because it is literally a 1-minute drive. In high school, my GF had me come to her youth group and her youth pastor, who was also a music teacher at our HS who was adored by the community. Really didn't sit well with me. I saw him go from 100% praise singing to turning her out to his wife and muttering something awful to her with the worst glare I'd ever seen. Only she and I were in his line of sight, then go right back to fake smile singing. I told her he seemed really fake and there was a dark side to him. Turns out he was really into kiddie PR0N. And even started buying alcohol for his pupils and inviting them to his house. The church knew. Covered it up. And he eventually got arrested for misconduct with a minor. Did a quick jail stint and moved out of state. I couldn't sleep, so I was driving around in the middle of the night, listening to music and enjoying the empty roads. Finally I started heading for home and joined up with my usual route. Getting to the point where I can turn right to head home. And left goes up towards the next big town. I'd been driving for a while, but as I reached this turn I had the overwhelming urge to turn left. Every time I thought about turning right, I felt this sense of dread and discomfort. I couldn't even bring myself to start to signal for that direction. I turned left instead and drove to the next town. Turned around there. And came back. Adding about 40 extra minutes to my journey. When I approached that road again, I felt fine and continued home. I arrive home and literally as I'm turning into my drive, my tire blows out. No warning. Just bam. Luckily I'm only going about 5 miles per hour as I turn into my drive. But it was still an effort to control the car. It was almost impossible to park it. The steering wheel was hard to turn. And the passenger side of the car felt heavy and difficult to maneuver. I was pissed, but thankful it had happened when I was in my drive. And not stranded out in the country at 3 AM. It hit me as I was organizing someone to come out and fix it the next day. Usually at that time of the morning I would be heading into town. If the tire was going to blow, it would have done so 20 minutes into the journey, when I was on a busy road doing 60 miles per hour with oncoming traffic only feet away. The extra time added to the journey the night before had instead caused it to blow harmlessly in my drive. I have no way to prove that it would have blown in a more dangerous place. But considering my gut instinct, I do think the detour probably saved my ass. It was like someone was telling me to stand in my kitchen. I had everything I needed to leave for work. But this feeling of forgetting something was so strong I just stood there. After I checked for everything again, I took a step towards the door and it was like someone was yelling at me to stop. So I stood for 10 more seconds. And then the feeling went away. Like a gate was lifted and I could pass. Got in my car and did my normal drive. Hit some heavier than normal traffic before coming across a 5-car pileup. One car was turned 180. Others were smashed and everyone was standing around on their phones. Had I left like I wanted to, I would have been it. I knew it. Too, and just said out loud, "Thank you." It happened in the worst way. I was working with a patient whose cancer was in full remission. She looked amazing and was telling me about the trips she and her husband was planning. Paris, Africa, etc. All the places she couldn't go to because of kids, military, and now cancer. But now, with nothing holding her back, she was going to take the world by storm. It hit me. And it hit me hard. As we were setting up her follow-up appointments, she asked me if I was okay. I said gas and she laughed me off. 1 week later she died in the hospital. Her cancer returned and in record time destroyed her to the point that she was bleeding out internally. They were going through so many bags of blood that the commander of the hospital told them to stop. I will never forget the look on her face as she dreamt of the future that I knew would never happen and the feeling it gave me. This will probably get buried. But it's cool. My mom was actively dying in hospice and my sister, brother-in-law, and I were in the room with her. Basically just waiting for her to take her last breaths. It took her about 24 hours to go from actively dying to passed away. Anyway, we were all taking turns taking naps so one of us would be awake in case the moment came. My sister stepped out of the room to take a phone call and my brother-in-law was already asleep. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, it felt like. but I must have fallen asleep because I remember being jolted awake by this feeling of urgency. I sat up and the nurse looked at me with that look on her face like, oh shit. It's gonna happen, so we yelled for my sister. Woke my brother-in-law up, and within about 2 minutes, my mom passed peacefully with all of us awake and surrounding her with love. I've just never had that feeling of urgency so hard in my life. In my teens, I used to help the elderly lady across the street with yard work, painting, and odd jobs to help maintain her home. She lived alone and couldn't manage it by herself. As I've shared here some time ago, I noticed that things had changed across the street. Her lights weren't coming on at night, per usual, and I didn't see her outside for several days. So, my instincts told me to go over and check. I found her lying on the kitchen floor. If I hadn't followed my gut feelings and looked in, the situation might have gone on for a long time, as no one else visited her or checked in on a regular basis. I've told this multiple times at this point, but my mom and dad went to visit some friends in Thunder Bay, Ontario. The friends introduced my parents to their daughter and her boyfriend. Well, the entire time my parents were visiting, my mom kept getting this really bad feeling about the boyfriend. He made her so uncomfortable for some reason that my parents actually ended up leaving early because my mom kept getting such a weird vibe from the guy. Well, a few weeks after their visit, the boyfriend killed my parents' friends, their daughter and other kid, and then himself. So my mom was definitely right. Driving my teenage nephew to a job interview. In the car was also his grandmother and younger brother. Suddenly and totally unexpectedly, I felt as if I was compelled to speak. I had an intense feeling that he shouldn't take the job. I warned him that I felt a terrible dread and felt that awful suffering and death was associated with the place. It also felt as if these weren't my words and I was just transmitting a message, passing on an official warning. He got the job. It was in a restaurant, having ignored my warning. Turns out the place was a hotbed of junkies who soon got him hooked too. Death, despair and madness followed. His friends died one by one of overdoses. His GF too. He became a hollow-eyed scarecrow and opportunistic sneak thief. He still broke in and stole his grandmother's engagement ring while she was at her husband's funeral. He went to prison. He was great there. He eventually lost his mind. Strange to report, he's still alive when so many others along the way died. He's about 40 now and living on a pension and doing okay, but the damage to his brain is permanent. You can call my message a gut feeling if you want, but as I related earlier, it felt more like I was acting as a transmitter. During a family vacation in Yellowstone, my parents sent me and my siblings out of our rented cabin so they could be alone, in hindsight, to do things I'd rather not think about. There was a small gas station type of store by the main lodge, so they handed me some cash and told us to go out and get ice cream. Some relevant information: there were 2 ways to the main lodge from our cabin: a scenic lakeside walk, or a roadside trek. As the eldest sibling, I was in charge of the younger 2 and the ice cream mission. Normally, I'm the kind of person who picks the scenic route, but something that day told me to walk the not as pretty road. My siblings were disappointed, but I pulled rank and we walked the road to the store. On our way back from getting ice cream, we passed by a cabin next to ours along the road, where the current renter was sitting on the porch. He yelled over at us to be careful and get inside. Not 15 minutes earlier, when we would have been walking to get ice cream, he had seen a decent sized grizzly bear walking on the lake right where Wood would have walked. I've trusted my gut ever since then. I was in a long-term relationship for several years during college. One time, we went on a short road trip with my beautiful best friend and 2 other friends, and I was in just a horrible mood. No idea why. Several months later, when we were off again, I was in the shower and the weirdest thought popped into my head: boyfriend should date best friend. They'd be perfect together. It didn't make any sense, but I felt compelled to address it with boyfriend. I called him and told him what had popped into my head, and he immediately confessed that he'd been in love with her since before we had broken up. To be clear, This love affair was completely one-sided and my friend had no idea until after I did. When the boyfriend eventually declared his love, she gave him a verbal lashing and was totally freaked out. This is my grandfather's story when he was in the Navy back in WW2. He was on ship at a base doing some grunt work. It's been years since me or my dad heard the story, so some details are lost. And all of a sudden he decided he needed to get off the ship. So he made his way off. I forget if he had to make an excuse or something. But not even 2 minutes after he got off, the ship explodes. An aerial attack hit the base from the Japanese. My grandfather loved through Pearl Harbor purely because of a gut feeling. Thanks Pop Pop.